The air felt strange. It was like static, you know, like when you feel like your hair is standing on end or something, and it just seemed to have a funny, palpable taste, or like a vacuum or something. It's hard to describe.
The sky got really strange. I've never seen anything like it. It actually turned green, and as it began to rain, the wind picked up, but it wasn't really crazy wind. It was just a mild wind. And I remember I was standing in the garage looking out, and the sky got real green and black, and you could see clouds at a very low level flying over us.
And it was pretty big hail. We thought it was cool, you know, out playing in the hail like kids do. You scoop it up and throw it around like snow. And then there were garbage cans flying in the air. That's the thing that I remember, is this cloud of dust and debris, and suddenly it got real dark and you couldn't see anything. And
all I could see was debris floating in the air. It was so close, there was no funnel shape to it. But there was a roof going by and shingles and stuff just floating slowly through the air.
It was up, the tail was up.
Yeah, and then you could see all the...
You could see the tail was spinning high.
You could see the debris. There was like a trailer that was up in the air, and you could see cars and everything that were inside of the tornado.
Now this cloud was real fat and real narrow at the bottom, but short, and it kept skipping. And it jumped right over the highway. But this thing was bouncing. The whole... Yeah. See, I'm seeing at the side view of it, not the oncoming view. And this thing was just bouncing along like a basketball. You know, it'd come down and jump maybe 20, 30 feet in the air, come down again. And that's the way it was.
And I remember leaning into the wind, west into the wind. The wind was so strong, I felt I could lean into the wind and the wind would support me. That's how strong the wind was that day. And then it was over. And
I remember when I came up out the doorway, I could see sunlight in the house, daylight, and parts of the roof were missing, and the walls were separated at the corners and laying outwards at about a 30 or 40 degree angle, so you could see out the walls and see light. Inside the house was glass, debris, kitchen plates, branches laying on the floor.
at which point the door blew off, and as he's looking out, he said, "There goes the silo." So the silo got tipped over, and the top of it was a wooden silo. The top of the silo was found a couple days later, a few fields away.
But then we looked north, we looked up Devonshire, and we saw there was a gas station at the corner, and it looked like it had been hit by a bomb. It was just all twisted and demolished.
There was 2 plum trees and the rest were apple trees, and there were only 2 left. They were either snapped off or derooted.
Right at the top of the steps was our back door that went outside, and I saw a crack to the left of the door in our drywall. I said, "Oh my gosh, you know, now we'd have to do some repair." And then I looked out the back window, and I could see no houses. There was nothing but debris and no grass. Just everything was just a shambles. Debris was just thick, you know.
My sister, my mother, and he all started screaming upstairs. The stuff was flying in the air, and I think it's a tornado. So I go running upstairs, and of course they're running downstairs, and they pushed me back downstairs. My father had been taking a bath. He came downstairs naked as a jaybird. We hid behind the water heater downstairs despite the fact that we had a concrete cement room, kind of like a bomb shelter, probably 20 feet away, we're hiding behind this water heater.
I remember my mother yelling at us for not having shoes on when the tornado hit, like we were supposed to know. I remember we got something out of the tornado. We had a brand new sprinkler from Western Auto, which was in the plaza. It has a price tag on it, not a dent in it. I think we used that for a lot of years.
And things for months afterwards were brought to us.
There was the police chief at that time was Erkfitz.
Elmer Erkfitz.
Elmer. I don't know how long later he brought us our marriage license that somebody had found somewhere, and he knew it was ours because it had Hebrew. It's called a ketubah in Jewish wedding marriage license. And he brought it back to us.
He brought it to the animal hospital,
yes,
and he found it in the field
somewhere.
And he says, "Doc, this has to be yours," because there was, so few Jewish families in Crystal Lake at the time.
And in fact, for years afterwards, my wife's the gardener in the family. Every time she would spade or I would spade, and she'd rake it and get ready to plant things, we would find gloves, socks, and stuff from
we found
the
stuff
store.
From Neisner's that had just been
store over there.
Papers from their office.
Had been driven down in the ground, obviously, and covered, and then we would find things for years afterwards.
Well, they saw the bottom of the lake in Island Lake.
Yeah.
We was out there putting wires up, and the guy says, I seen the bottom of this lake. I said, what are you talking about? He says, when that thing went through here, he said, the water's parted. He says, I'm looking for Moses.
The day, it was pushing 80 degrees for April 11th, and the air was very unsettled. It would be, the sun would be out 1 minute, and then we'd get like light rain and sprinkles and scattered showers all over the place. The air was very unsettled. And so I'm sitting there at McDonald's, and I remember having this sensation. It's like the air was almost like palpable. It was, you could almost sense something within the air. But the tornado was actually going through because I was about a half a mile, about 3/4 of a mile away from where the path where it went through. I saw when I heard all these sirens going off and everything, of course my curiosity caused me to drive up in that general direction. And the first thing I saw, I had no idea what had happened. It's like I say, I had no idea that a tornado had just gone through. And the first thing I remember seeing was that it was a standard filling station at the time. And it was just blown apart. It was like the whole thing. And then I just remember utility poles just crisscross across 14 like toothpicks, and all the wires tangled up. And I remember seeing a semi laying sideways across the highway with a car sitting on top of it, still not having realized that this was a tornado that came through here. So I parked over on Union Street and started walking towards where the real devastation was. And it was like there were people around and spectators and a lot of emergency vehicles trying to get in and everything. And it was like we almost instinctively formed like a line abreast and started covering through that path of destruction. And it was just totally, apocalyptic was the only word I could think of. Just like everything splinters and insulation, and here and there there'd be a house that just seemed untouched. Here and there you could hear a telephone ringing. I remember that. And I remember seeing like a full-size station wagon car sitting in a basement where there was no house. And there was a deck, and I remember seeing a victim laying on the deck. And that was my job the next day, rounding up about 1,000 mink. There was a small mink ranch at that corner. So it tore. There were rows and rows of cages, and it just tore up all the cages and rows and everything. And all the mink ranches had like a perimeter fence around them. So basically, we were having a mink roundup the next day. I mean, we were ranchers.
Yeah.
And we didn't even know the tornado was going on. And my husband went out to take our son somewhere. He went to take our son to visit a friend and got to Route 14 and discovered that there was a tornado. And he come back home and told me, sit down. My dad owned, where Andy's is, he owned Bill's Grill, and he owned the A&W restaurant, which was at 14 and Main Street. And I was afraid for them. And we got to Route 14 and they told me I couldn't go down there. And I said, I am going down there. My mother, I got to get to my mother. So they let me through. And my dad had been sitting in the chair in the basement of his house in the Coventry. And he had left to go to the restaurant, and a 2x4 went through his chair.
After he left.
After he left.
So he was lucky.
So he was very lucky.
And when I first went up to Route 14 and I looked down and I seen a car up on a telephone pole, another boat up in the gas station, and all this stuff covered in Route 14. It was really a big mess. And then I found out afterwards that several of our friends were killed in the tornado. What's his name?
Connect
family.
They had a big family, children, and a friend, Allen's, their house was hit and almost destroyed, and that was on in the Colby by Herald Street, somewhere in there. And my dad kept the Bill's Grill restaurant open all night. We served lots and lots of people. We worked as a family all night, and the help of family and help to serve the electricians and everybody that was out working. We stayed open all night long to feed them, more or less. I mean, they paid for it, but
they stayed open, accommodated them.
It was just a lot of hard work. I mean, but everybody was, I don't know how to put it, I guess, kind of loving each other, helping each other. We were all felt like we were really helping by staying open and feeding people, and those poor guys worked so hard.
And we were building, my brother-in-law come to help me because we were going to build a dog kennel. Mm-hmm. And we had a old chicken coop all cleaned out and stuff, and we were going to build a kennel. And we started working on it. We just started working on it. It was beautiful. A beautiful day. I mean, it was gorgeous. I mean, sunny and great. I think we're in shorts and t-shirts for Pete's Day. It was nice out.
And then it just started to rain like crazy. So we went in the house, and then it cleared up. And then we went outside, and we were working again, but the skies were really
weird. Just
weird colors and everything.
Bluish green and just eerie.
Yeah, so then we decided to go back in the house again. And we were sitting upstairs, basically, in the house. And I was looking out the one window of the side of the house, and I seen like a couple pigeons. They were trying to fly into the barn window because the barn windows were all broke out at that. And all of a sudden they just disappeared. And then on the TV it said something about a tornado warning for Crystal Lake. And Rick looked out the window and he goes, "It's a tornado." And like
the front window.
Yeah, he looked out the front window, and we had the dogs were upstairs and everything else, so we decided to hurry up and get downstairs, but by that time it was already passed.
Yeah, there was no way to go.
Yeah. So then after it passed, then we went outside and we watched it.
Fast. And we ran right downstairs.
Yeah. And as soon as it passed, because the noise that it made and everything else, it was just undescribable.
It sounded like you'd be riding on the front of a freight train, riding on the engine. That's how loud it was. It was so, it's just like tremendous roar, like you ever heard.
Like you hear what these you know, the young kids, would they have all these boom boxes and all that stuff in their cars, and it actually vibrates. I mean, it
the
actually
house was vibrating.
Yeah,
everything
was
floor,
like vibrating,
everything shaking.
Yeah, and then after, like I said, we went back outside and we watched it going through on the other side of Crystal Lake Avenue and all that. That's where it was going through, and
it was up. The tail was up.
Yeah, and then you could see all the.
Yeah, you could see the tail was spinning high.
You could see the debris. There was like a trailer that was up in the air, and you could see cars and everything that were inside of the tornado.
Yeah, we watched the cars flip. We weren't too smart. Number one, we were upstairs instead of in the basement.
Yeah.
I mean, that was number one. Number two, as soon as it went out of our sight to the windows, we both, remember, I was 20, he was
15.
I mean,
16.
we were pretty fast in those days. So we got right down the stairs, and we got out in time to see what it was doing. And it just, when we went to Orchard Acres, I never seen nothing like that in my life. I've never seen nothing like it. I mean, cars and everything was just flying in the air. Just like if somebody just took a car and just flung it. After it went through, we finally settled down, you know, because you're pumping like crazy.
Yeah.
And we just looked at the orchard. Remember, there was 2 plum trees and the rest were apple trees, and there's only 2 left. They're either snapped off or derooted. I mean, and then the mink farm was on the corner of our farm, and then right to the, it would be on the northwest side of Pushlick Avenue. That got hit bad. The mink cages were all, the minks were running all over the place, and people, my cousins were, I didn't do, but they got paid for trying to catch the minks. They called out on them afterwards. That was a total mess over there too. And of course, you had no communication. We had no cell phones, and we were worried. I was worried about my cousins, you know, because we could see the path. And then, unfortunately, we found out that the Wolter family, John Wolter, was one of my best friends, had killed, you know, his family. And I remember maybe the next day, but when we could travel around, we did. And I remember going by John's house, and because I knew, and his van, his work van, I don't figure who he worked for, but his work van, the house was gone. His work van was in the basement. The van was in the basement.
We got a call, I was home, that we were to get together and go out to Island Lake because of the tornado. McHenry County Sheriff's Department needed help. They didn't know how bad it really was, except that it was bad at Crystal Lake and they were busy there. So our group, officers and squad people, and our assignment was to go and look for either people or that were, a lot of the buildings were down, and the buildings were actually mainly the new subdivisions that the new houses were built after the war. So there's quite a bit of destruction there. So we had to look through the buildings and rubble for people. And at the same time, the Uniform Division had to keep people out of the area so that we could do our business. There were injuries, but only one death, and that was a little boy, as far as Island Lake is concerned. But the rest of us had to search through the buildings, what were left of the buildings. Roofs are off, buildings are down, because these are all like bungalow type buildings. But then some were standing, weren't even touched, and rubble all over the place. The devastation, the loss of the home and their personal property and their injuries, yeah, that's something else to deal with. And it was all an emergency type duty, And we want to make them comfortable and see that they got to the hospital, and see that they got their wounds taken care of and so forth. Yeah. And then protect the property and personal properties that would have been scattered. And as I say, with the new homes that were destroyed, I mean, that was very tragic, because the guys are just back from the war, got their families together and so forth, and it was nice subdivisions within Island Lake, and then to see the destruction, it was one of those things that wasn't pretty, but it was a job that we had to do.
Home, and I remember playing outside, and I remember the clouds. I mean, they were just really, really black, and it was hot and humid, and it started to hail. I mean, big hail, and so we ran inside and just kind of watched the hail. And then after the hail was over, I took my 3-year-old sister across the street to West School to take her on the merry-go-round or whatever, and I was swinging around on the merry-go-round, and my other sister Terry came over and said, "Oh my gosh, there was a tornado and Grandpa was killed." And I mean, it was just shocking to me, because he was 52 years old and young, really very young, and just an image of him dying over anything was just a lot for an 11-year-old to take. So I ran home, and I remember my best friend tried to get a hold of me because she had heard there was a tornado, and she and I used to spend nights there. We were a family of 5 kids in a small house on the west end of the lake, so whenever I had overnights, we always went to my grandma and grandpa's, and so she was very close to my grandparents as well. And she my mother wouldn't let the call go through, so as soon as I got home, though, I naturally called my best friend Jody and told her. She goes, "Oh my gosh, there was a tornado by your grandparents' house." And I said, "Yeah, I know, Grandpa was killed." You know, I mean, it was just the shock of it. And that was the first shock, first of all, having a grandparent that was so young and so alive, you know, being taken away. And then that night, my grandma came over, and to see my grandma was a stout German, in fact, from the Heisler clan. You know, Heisler's Bootery, German, and you never saw her flinch or, you know, anything, and to see her fall apart and cry was really a lot. It was very emotional, for it still is today. And you know, the funeral and all that was just I don't know, just surreal. And then the next thing that was surreal is when they finally brought us to see the house. Probably about 5 or 6 days afterwards. Nobody could get in. They had roads blocked. Nobody but immediate family. I just couldn't believe it. The giant oak tree that I jumped out of into piles of leaves was gone. I mean, the tree had to be 150 years old. It was huge. To see that, you know, the power of my grandfather being taken, the power of a giant tree, and all the damage was just amazing. That day, my grandfather had been watching a basketball game, and it had gone into overtime. And for as long as my grandmother lived after that, she said, "I wish it had gone into a double or triple overtime. Perhaps he would have been in the house." And they had 4 acres right across from what was a Checa Lodge in the plaza that they had bought, I guess, in the mid-40s. They had remodeled the house completely, and there was an old barn, which the 2 years before that he started remodeling. My grandfather was unbelievably handy in woodworking and stuff. Brilliant salesperson. He was vice president of Inland Litho in Chicago, in charge of sales. So, I mean, the man could do anything. In fact, he even knit an Afghan just to prove to his, you know, to my grandma that he could do it. He was just that type of a guy. So he completely remodeled the barn, built a pool, and that day he was going out. We had been swimming the year before, but the deck was never poured, so he was going out. They were coming that Monday to pour the deck, and he wanted to put the flags on how far he wanted it out. And the single overtime game was over, and he said to my grandmother's last words were, "I'm going to have to run between the raindrops." And he went out there, and she went to do the dishes, and within minutes the tornado had hit. The whole second floor of the barn blew on top of him, and he was, half of his body was, you know, still exposed, and he had his keys and his measuring tape in his hand, but the barn structure just crushed him completely. The barn that he remodeled had all of his woodworking on the main floor, a pool area, a recreational area, you know, changing rooms and a kitchen and stuff. And then upstairs, he had built the entire second floor into a basketball court for kids. That was back in the day when you didn't have all, you know, all the after school activities and things like that, and he wanted some place for teenagers to be able to hang out that was a healthy place. That's the type of person he was. So he had regular hours for the 7th graders and 8th graders, and then the high school kids, and they were welcome there on evenings. I remember the hours. High school had to be out of there by 10, I think, on weekends, and the younger kids had to be out by 8:30. I mean, they had actual hours. And the Sunday before Palm Sunday, the kids had thrown some stuff out the upstairs window, and he had caught them and closed it that day immediately and said, and because you've done this now, you can't come next weekend, which was Palm Sunday. So had that not happened, there probably would have been 30 boys up there. But contrary to the stories that are out there, the boys were not up there. He did not run out to save the boys. We think he was on his way back to the house where, Grandma, the love of his life, was. I'm it's kind of funny because I just recently watched To Kill a Mockingbird. And I remember when probably 2 years before that, because that movie came out in '62, so it probably was '63 or '64, he gathered all of us older grandchildren, and I was the second oldest, I had an older brother, but all of us that would have any concept of what the movie was about, and insisted that we go see that movie with him. I mean, he was just such a forward-thinking man. In fact, it took me till the age of 44 to get married, and as I kept telling my mother, I was never going to get married until I found a man like my grandpa. And she said I was too picky, but I managed to hold out until I found one darn close. So he just very forward-thinking. He could do anything. He could fix anything. He could, he was a salesman. He was, top at whatever game he was playing. I am named after him. My middle name is Rae, R-A-E, and I never had kids, but my friend Jody honored him by naming her daughter Danny Rae, and then Danny has honored my grandpa by naming her daughter Madison Rae. So the Rae name goes on. And on the Goss side, there's several of the boys that have the middle name Rae. So it's kind of a he was an amazing man. I don't remember this. I remember hearing though afterwards, after the funeral at Queerhammer on 176, and where he's buried is Ridgefield Cemetery. And the car line was so long that it stretched from Queerhammer to the cemetery. I mean, you couldn't even get to it. He had an unbelievable amount of, business associates and people that honored him by coming to the funeral from Chicago. He was originally from Wilmette.
My brother, who was 6, was next door, just south of our house, playing with his friend in the garage of their house. So it had to be my mother, my father, and my 4-year-old sister and I. I think we had the garage door open, and we were kind of watching as the thunderstorm approached, and there was hail, and it was pretty big hail. We thought it was cool, out playing in the hail like kids do. You scoop it up and throw it around like snow, and then there were garbage cans flying in the air. That's the thing that I remember, is this cloud of dust and debris, and suddenly it got real dark and you couldn't see anything. I don't remember the sound at all. That's completely absent from maybe it was because it was so loud that I blanked out. And so we realized it was a tornado. The thing is, the way our house faces, if you're standing in the garage, open garage looking out, you can't see to the south. So we didn't see it coming. It was there. By the time we'd come into the house, it had hit. So here we are in the foyer. We're sitting ducks. And we just got as low as we could and prayed and covered my sister up, and kind of leaned up against the upstairs stairs, sort of blocked things. And the windows downstairs blew out. If we'd been down there on our way to that downstairs room, we would have been shredded by broken glass because the windows blew out. And it was over in a minute, and while the wind was still blowing, I think my father must have taken a few steps down where he could see that the neighbor's house where my brother had been playing, that their garage where he had been playing had collapsed. It was still attached to the house. So it was like this was the outer wall and the house is over here, and it was went, and it was still attached to the house here like on a hinge. And the other part was resting on their 57 Plymouth with the big tail fins. It was holding up the other side of the garage. And oh my God, Steve's over there. So Dad went out and it was still wind and debris. what had happened was that they were playing in the open bay of the garage, but the door was closed, the garage door. And when the storm hit, my brother's friend's brother, who was between us in age, pushed them up against the house, against the house wall, which was a good thing because the garage door just blew in flat. It looked like, you had just unrolled the garage door on the floor of the garage, and that's where they'd been playing, so they would have been hurt if that had. So we appreciated, he was kind of heroic, the older brother. So everybody was fine. There wasn't a scratch in any of us. But then, so we kind of looked around. I remember, going outside, and of course there's debris all over the place. And it looked like somebody taking a machine gun to the south wall of the house because it had that fiber siding. And so that was all shredded, and that would all have to eventually be replaced. Our swing set was still there, but the jungle gym was gone. We found it. I don't remember, it was later that day, about half a block away in a tree. It had just been picked up and moved. But then we looked north, we looked up Devonshire, and we saw there was a gas station at the corner, and it looked like it had been hit by a bomb. It was just all twisted and demolished. What else I remember is they called out the Boy Scouts. But I remember standing on Route 14, there was a constant traffic jam of people coming in to look at the devastation, and it was only a 2-lane highway in those days, so people were going along. And I remember all the Boy Scouts, they had us lined up on Route 14, going like this, trying to, move on, nothing to see here, that kind of thing. So we did that for a day, waved our arms at the traffic. After that, it just life, what I remember is just life going back to normal for us. We had to get our siding replaced, and the next door neighbors got their garage repaired, and people got their roofs. It was scary, but we were lucky that had we been, a block farther north, it'd be a little bit different story, I think.
And that particular day, we were going to a family party in Des Plaines. But more importantly, my dad was working on his income taxes. So my brother, my mom, and I were all ready to go to the party, and we were waiting in the kitchen. My dad was sitting in the dining room at the dining room table working on the income taxes, and he had to have complete silence. So we couldn't have the radio on, which was on all the time. So we had no knowledge that there was a storm coming. So we were in the kitchen, and there must have been some kind of the storm must have caught my brother's attention. So he went to look out the south window, and he's going, wow, there's a pretty big storm there. And my mom and I went to look out the window, so the three of us are looking at this pretty ferocious storm going through. And my brother then decided to go out the kitchen door to the mud porch, which had another outside door, at which point the door blew off. And as he's looking out, he said, there goes the silo. So the silo got tipped over, and the top of, it was a wooden silo, the top of the silo was found a couple days later a few fields away. There was a small shed attached to the house. That wall, the wall of the shed, also got blown out at that time. So everybody was kind of startled. We still didn't know what was happening. He came back in the house, and then again, my mom, my brother, and I were looking out the window going, what's going on? I think my dad was still working on the taxes. And quite shortly thereafter, the storm ended, and we all went outside. Prior to our farm, the tornado touched down at another farm west of ours called Moo Meadows. And it was just a short distance from ours. And that dairy barn was completely leveled and killed 8 head of cattle. So from that farm, it came to our farm and did the damage at my parents' farm. And then there was a machine shed, a wooden machine shed that had been leveled. And I remember leaning into the wind, west into the wind. The wind was so strong, I felt I could lean into the wind and the wind would support me. That's how strong the wind was that day. And then it was over. And then
we actually were playing basketball. These two were at a basketball barn that used to be over from Eckel Lodge, you know, the old Eckel Lodge on 14 in Virginia. And this guy had built a barn, and he set it up for kids to play basketball on the second floor.
Rae Goss. He just had his driver's license for 2 months.
Right.
And
it's an event.
And it was one of the first nice days of the spring. And it was, I don't know if it was 65 or 70 degrees, but it was warm out.
It was warm.
And he had the top down on his dad's brand new Bonneville convertible.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So I went over there, found him. We went by the freeze. So we went out to Woodstock Country Club because that's where I was going to apply for the job. So I'm in there. These guys are in the car, and when we left the country club, this big black cloud was coming towards us. Well, it started to hail and rain, and so we put the top up. I put the top up, and I pulled out, and we were going to go back to Crystal Lake. And what happened was that I couldn't see because of the hail and the rain. So I pulled into what I thought was this guy's driveway. Well, it turned out he had a U-shaped driveway, and I didn't hit the driveway. I ended up in the middle of his yard. So this was a rather heavy car, the convertible. So we kind of sat there and waited out the rain and the storm, and then I said, well, we'll just get out of here. And so I started to pull out, and I couldn't pull out because Bonneville had sunk down into the mud. So I tried. These guys got out and tried to push me, and that didn't work out. So finally, we were kind of wit's end. You know what do you call it, tow truck or something. One of my friends, his dad owned a construction company in Woodstock, so I called him instead.
How did you call?
And from the from the guys, the yard we were in, that phone. This was before cell phones. You know, I got it.
And the guy was pissed off. He could see that we'd ruined his yard.
We called him and I said, Tim, we need your help. Well, he got a dump truck, came out, pulled in, and he looks at it and said, you're screwed. We're never gonna get you out of here. So somehow he hooked up to the axle, and he pulled us out. So we were out.
Well, this took a long time.
Yeah,
we were there for probably a couple hours.
Yeah.
Easy.
So we headed back to Crystal Lake, unbeknownst to us that anything that was going on. So we pulled in to Crystal Lake to drop these guys off, and we were going to Mike's house first, and everything was shut down. 14 was shut down by to get to his house. So he came
Traffic
up
was backed up to where the McHenry County College is right now.
That's right.
And we couldn't get onto 14 from Ridgefield Road, so we turned around and we went around the back roads and came in another way. And we went down Dole Avenue to 14 to try to get across, and the police wouldn't let us take the car across, so they had to drop me there.
Okay, so we dropped him off, and then he lived over on Pomeroy at the time?
I lived on Pomeroy, which wasn't blocked off because we could drive back that way. Yeah. Well, my mom came out of the house, and she was almost hysterical. And where have you been? I can't believe you're alive. And we're like, what? You know, and I said, we got stuck. Why didn't you call? How could we call? It was just, you know, and our names, I guess, were on the missing list because the last place anybody had seen us was the barn, and the barn had been completely leveled. And my mom didn't know I was going to play basketball, and so they assumed that's where I was, and they were going through rubble trying to find.
Well, I lived in Orchard Acres. I tried to get into the subdivision, and of course they wouldn't let me, so I parked in a field someplace. So I walked across 31, and my dad was there directing traffic. You know, he looked at me and said, "Oh, you're alive." And that was about it. So I walk up to the house, and every other house in the subdivision, I kind of skipped around and hit and left different homes alone. So I walked in, and my mother was sitting in a rocking chair with my sister Martha, who was the youngest. So she looks at me, and the color just went right out of her face because she thought I was with these guys, and you know, we're all dead.
My dad was saying, this kid is always where he says he's going to be. And I'm really glad I wasn't where I said I was going to be.
Actually, I saved their lives. But they,
Yeah.
they don't admit it.
No,
He's been telling us that for 50 years.
Hanging
Kudos for
over
that.
our heads for years. But
We weren't home. We were in Mississippi visiting my father.
And Gail's father started the Colby subdivision, where the tornado hit the most. So we went down to see them, and we just kind of a long trip. And when we got there, he came out about 10 o'clock at night, and he said, "It's all gone." That was it.
I felt very sorry for my father because he built all those homes. But when we came back, we couldn't even find our house. Because of all the landscaping were gone. By the time we got home, I think we were gone about 5 days. And when we came home, it had all been bulldozed into one flat area around the area we were. And it was very eerie because they had spotlights going up in the area behind me. It was just it was kind of dusk, and it was very eerie. And they had the spotlights because of the looting, because the furniture naturally blew in behind our house somewhere. But we never got any of that back because it was all gone, and it was because of the looting. And
So when we came in, the only route in was on Union Street, and we started counting the lots, 1, 2, 3, to figure out which one was ours. So finally got it. It was kind of a eerie night that night, and it was a little mist coming in, and we stood there and looked at it, and our kids, of course, were upset looking at all their toys were gone and all that kind of stuff, and their bikes and such.
But we were very fortunate because my sister had had phoned me and said that we could come to their house, and they lived in 6 acres over on the other side of town. And when the tornado hit, they didn't even know it.
I thought we were really fortunate because we rented a house in Walkup Woods, and it belonged to John Stefani. So he rented the house to us for 3 months while we rebuilt on the same spot. So we were really kind of fortunate. We didn't have to live in trailers or in rented rooms and such. We were much more fortunate than a lot of other people. Our house was completely gone except for a bathroom wall. And there were 2 things that were kind of neat. We had a portable dishwasher. One that in those days you pushed it up against the sink and put it on the stove, and it weighed about 200 pounds. And right next to it was a little plastic, not a pull toy, one that the kids sat on and pushed around on. The dishwasher was 150 yards away. That little toy was still on the same deck where we left it, right next to each other. The thing I remember the most was actually after the tornado, and I was cleaning up. I worked in Palatine, and they gave me an additional week or 10 days off. But going through the grounds, the glass and the nails and the debris, and everybody, if you raked, you just pulled stuff up. Things that didn't belong to us and maybe a block away and such. And even after the tornado, must have been 2 months later, one of the other neighbors behind us found things that belonged to us and returned it to us too. So that was really frightening. And the basement was just filled with insulation and glass. Yeah.
There was glass inside the wash machine that was down in the basement. That's how strong that was.
Started out, probably went to church, and then we were raking the front yard because we were having a Schott family party at our home later that afternoon. So everybody was out raking out the winter debris out of the front yard. Then I went inside because my father then had to go to a funeral for Dennis Lewandowski, who was one of his former students at Ridgefield School who had died of leukemia. So I'm downstairs in the basement polishing his shoes. He's upstairs taking a bath, getting ready for this funeral, or wake, whatever it was, my sister, my mother, and he all started screaming upstairs. The stuff was flying in the air, and I think it's a tornado. So I go running upstairs, and of course they're running downstairs, and they pushed me back downstairs. My father had been taking a bath. He came downstairs naked as a jaybird. We hid behind the water heater downstairs, despite the fact that we had a concrete cement room, kind of like a bomb shelter, probably 20 feet away. We're hiding behind this water heater. The air pressure was quite intense, that my ears were popping. All of a sudden my cat flew in the basement window, and before you knew it, it was over. We went back upstairs, went outside. The neighbor who lived in the apartment adjoining my parents' house was walking up the the sidewalk. He was all full of mud and leaves. He had been blown from the backyard to the front yard, through bushes, etc. There were electric lines all over the front yard, garbage cans, damage all over the place. The cars, the car that was in the parking lot, the windshield was totally shattered. Our dog was up in an apple tree. The dog was okay. I got the dog out of the tree. The cat ran away. The car in the garage was damaged, and the windshield was damaged also. The front of the garage was damaged. And we had no electricity, obviously, because there were lines all over the front yard. Ended up going to change the party to my Aunt Carrie's house over in Burns Bridge. My cousin came in with his girlfriend from Island Lake. It ended up her little brother had died in the tornado. She had known that. She didn't know where her parents were yet, but here she was sitting amongst us at this Schott party that had to go on. Schott parties have to go on, tornado or not.
I taught at Crystal Lake High School at that time, and we had just started spring break. So actually we were out of town. We were in Carthage, Illinois, cooking a steak for celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary, I guess it was at that time. And I received a phone call, and it happened to be Lynn Sheo, who I taught biology with at Central High School, what's now Central High School. And he said, "Larry, we had a little tornado here in Crystal Lake." "Oh, yeah?" And he said, "And your house was in it." And he said, "But I boarded up your door and put plastic over your window that's missing." And he said, "But you have some roof damage you need to repair." And I said, "Well, how bad was the tornado?" And he said, "Well, the houses in back of you are gone." I got by with my front door, including the casing, went out. My big picture window went out. My steel fireplace damper was sucked open, and I found insulation in the basement. And then I had some roof damage that I had to get plastic over before I get shingles done.
And our fence was missing.
Oh, we had a white board fence in the backyard, and a big part of the fence was gone. So that's how close it was. I said, well, Len said you need to get back and repair the roof and so on. And so my father came with me. We had, the baby was
10 months.
10 months old.
And there was no power.
And so she stayed in Carthage. Of course, we had no power, no gas, or anything. And so Dad and I got back, and since we just moved into the house about 2 weeks before, I didn't have ID for that address. So I had to go get certification that it was truly me, that I lived there. And then we had to go over to Barrington and get a motel room because they wouldn't let anyone stay in the area overnight. And then my dad was able to get in with me, and we got shingles and repaired the roof enough so it wouldn't leak. And then we had to get a contractor to repair the window in the front door. While I was up on the roof, I took some pictures of the neighborhood from my roof, and then I walked around the neighborhood and took some pictures, including out at Neisner's, with the roof was gone there, and Piggly Wiggly, which was pretty damaged.
Yeah, when I came back a week later, it was just sort of eerie. I mean, by that time there were big cranes and trying to go through and move the stuff out. But yeah, it was just kind of devastating to look out. I mean, we were new, so we didn't even know many of the neighbors yet. But
I just thought it was sort of interesting. Some of the trees, the limbs were ripped off all the way around the tree except the ones on the northeast side, as if to say it went that way as it headed out towards 31.
Just driving around, yeah. And I stopped at the light on heading east on 14, and stopped at the light at Colby, and I was headed for the airport that day. I wanted to go over and maybe do some flying, but the weather was not cooperating that day. It was bad. It was just a lousy day, and that particular day, it was a storm was brewing right in our backyard, because it was like pea green soup. It was just terrible. Pouring rain, and I'm sitting at the light and I'm thinking to myself, hurry up and change. I want to get the devil out of here. I don't want to be here. And the light changed and I stepped on the gas, and because of the storm, I didn't go straight ahead in Virginia. I turned and went down 14 towards Cary. Don't remember where it was. I pulled in there and made a U-turn, and I went back into Crystal Lake. And when I got to Main Street, I looked down Main Street, and all the telegraph poles from the railroad were all laid on Main Street. And I thought, what happened here? And so I headed into town north, and when I got up where the old fire was, and I don't even know what's in there today, and I turned around and looked back behind south of the high school, and I could see through the open field that something bad had happened. I didn't quite know what. And so I scooted around and went over past the high school, because I have an aunt that lived over on Lil, and she came out on the porch and said, I'm fine, but I don't know about Bob, who was my cousin, her son. And so I said, well, I'll run over there. Well, I ran over, drove over to their house. Well, their garage had been, if not torn off, was mangled up pretty bad, but nobody was home. Then when you looked down Keith Avenue, you could see all the different houses that had been hit by the storm. And just one of those ironies that hits you, that I could associate piles of rubble with being somebody's house. But I looked down, I think the street is Union Street, on the corner, to where Dick Wolter lived. No house. And so I ran down there, no rubble. That house had been hit apparently dead center. There was no house, no rubble. But the amazing part of it is there's a panel van, I think it was white, sitting in his basement. And it didn't look like it had a scratch on it. Now, panel vans don't go in people's basements. Dick Wolter, I knew him, I first met Dick Wolter probably about 58, maybe, something like that. I was taking flying lessons with him, so I knew he and his wife and his kids, and he and his wife and son were killed that day. I started to help some people when they were digging through rubble looking for something, and then some of the local people came around and said, if you don't live here, get out. So I picked up and I left. If I never see one again, that will be fine with me.
So I remember being out on my bicycle, riding up and down around the area of Crystal Lake Avenue and John Street. And being 6 years old, I wasn't actually that tuned in with the weather at that age, but I got creeped out when these yellow and the sky turned like yellow and green as the clouds came in like a filter between the sun and me. And I remember looking at the clouds and I got scared. So I went home and went in the house, and I remember we were playing some kind of games, card games on the bunk beds, and it was relatively calm out. I remember the wind started picking up gradually, not bad, but then all of a sudden it sounded like people were outside the house just throwing rocks and stones and whatever you could throw at the house. The noise was overwhelming. And looking out the window, you started seeing things going horizontally in the wind. Branches, debris, boards, shingles, and all that debris was hitting the house at the same time. That's what the loud noise was. My mom, who was doing dishes, let out the biggest scream I've ever heard her yell out in my whole life. Everybody ate in the basement. And probably didn't always listen to her that well, but she didn't have to tell me twice. And I remember being huddled under some type of table. I think it was probably a few minutes later, the noise, people refer to tornadoes as the sound of a freight train. To me, it was just a loud, low frequency rumbling, things hitting the house. It didn't remind me of a freight train at all. And I think it only lasted 2 or 3 minutes. I remember being concerned about my dad and asking my mom, is my dad gonna be okay, or where's Dad? Turns out he took cover in the plaza in one of the stores. Not a lot of damage in the stores, and some roof tile fell in, but that's where he was. The noise subsided. I remember my mom being the first one up the steps, and I was the youngest. I was probably last. And I remember when I came up out the doorway, I could see sunlight in the house, daylight, and parts of the roof were missing, and the walls were separated at the corners and laying outwards at about a 30 or 40 degree angle, so you could see out the walls and see light. Inside the house was glass, debris, kitchen plates, branches laying on the floor. I remember my mother yelling at us for not having shoes on when the tornado hit, like we were supposed to know. Once we went outside, I was surprised because I remember clear sky. And on John Street, there was debris, branches, our garage roof was gone. A huge tree we had in the backyard was uprooted, and the big hole where the root ball left was enormous. I think I probably went into shock then, because I don't remember my dad coming home, and I don't remember ever leaving the house. Some minor things I remember is, we lost a lot. My dad had a rifle he had when he was a child in Iowa. He was going to give it to me. That was gone. I remember we got something out of the tornado. We had a brand new sprinkler from Western Auto, which was in the plaza. It had a price tag on it, not a dent in it. I think we used that for a lot of years. I go back occasionally. I took my grandson past the house on 31 John Street a few months ago, and we go through pictures on YouTube or in the paper. And he lives now in Kobe's, just down the street from like Keith Avenue and Union. I show him pictures, and I show him houses that were destroyed back during the tornado, and we look at pictures of the destruction. Not that I'm trying to scare him. I just want him to know. I want him to appreciate Mother Nature and not to take warnings lightly.
It was Palm Sunday, April 11th, and it was a very windy day. And he took the two girls, Vanessa and Wendy, out to May's drugstore to buy a kite. And May's drugstore was gone in the plaza. And they had the radio on, and it was a Wisconsin station, and it said that there have been tornadoes sighted, and that you should go to the southwest corner of your basement. They came home, and we had just got a new color television set. We were watching the Masters Golf Tournament.
Well, we were in the den, and the living room was over here, and she came right in the den and said that the windows that were painted shut had blown open, and the drapes came down, and they were going out vertically, sucked out of the house. And she knew that was really unusual. So
So we got up.
Luckily, we grabbed Wendy happened to be with us because we were watching color TV for the first time. And we started down the stairs. We had both kids, and she remembered that I grabbed them. And we didn't quite make it down the stairs when the house shook and it's like all the insulation,
everything
starts coming down that you didn't know was there, and it's like snowing.
I think the force threw us to the floor of the basement. We didn't make it to the bottom because afterwards all the basement windows were blown out, so there had to be a suction. I screamed and the kids screamed, and we huddled at the bottom of the stairs, and then he said, "Let's get out of here." And I screamed, "Don't go, don't."
The basement door, see, part of the house was gone, and
most was gone.
And some of it, for some crazy reason, wasn't. I opened the door up, and the house was gone, and the sky was blue. It's a gorgeous sky. And at that time, Twilight Zone was our favorite program. And I said to her, I says, "It's like Twilight Zone."
And then he said, "Come up."
Because it was over. You could tell it was
it was blue sky. And then we came up, and he turned around, and he looked next door, and the truck was in the basement.
In the foundation.
In the foundation. The foundation didn't hold. It was blown. The son was worked for a paint company, and the truck was there. And he said, "Oh my goodness, the Holters are dead." And I said to him, I said, "How do you know?" They'd been flying kites, and he had waved to the neighbor.
I knew they were home.
He knew they were home. We went to a neighbor on the corner, and their house just partly was gone. And I was barefoot. And she gave me a pair of shoes, and she gave me a jacket.
And everyone was around the house and back of us. And this one woman says, "Call the paramedics, call the paramedics." And I'm a veterinarian, so I went over and I looked at this person, and I told her, I says, "You don't have to call him, he's dead." And I told her it must be the guy who lived in that house. But it wasn't. It was the guy who lived, it was the Wolter who had blown from our house into their house. The tornado sucked them out of their house, sucked the people out of the house.
Then what happened to us after that, everything was there except this piano, which you can see in the picture. A friend who lived in Coventry. So this friend said, "What are you going to do? Where are you going to go?" Here we're standing there, the two of us with the two little girls, and we said,
we hadn't thought about it.
Obviously we didn't think about it. So he said, "Well, come to my house and have some coffee." And those people took us in for 6 weeks long. The people in Crystal Lake were wonderful to us. And things for months afterwards were brought to us. People brought us things that they knew. One was her dress, had a violin on it. A babysitter said, it was all shredded. She said, "I know this is yours because I babysat for you." And they found all different kinds of...
There was the police chief at that time was Erkfitz.
Elmer Erkfitz.
I don't know how long later he brought us our marriage license that somebody had found somewhere. And he knew it was ours because it had Hebrew. It's called a ketubah in Jewish wedding marriage license. And he brought it back to us.
He brought it to the animal hospital, and he found it in the field.
Somewhere.
And he says, "Doc, this has to be yours." Because there was, so few Jewish families in Crystal Lake at the time.
A leg, and it was sort of tilted, but there was debris in it and everywhere.
Yeah.
The little insulation got everywhere. In everything you can imagine, there was...
people were really... they had to give us everything. We had nothing, But we had our lives, and that's all that counted. It did change our life, Material things mean absolutely
it changes nothing. Your outlook on life.
Your whole outlook has changed. You live for today. They were lovely people, our next door neighbors.
You become like...
I worked for come in. We went back to the headquarters to call our dispatcher to get released to go home. And he said, no, I want you to guys stick around, storm coming. Okay. So it was around overtime, we didn't care. So we were sitting in the office looking out the window, and all of a sudden we see this cloud. And I'd never seen anything like it before. We go outside and stand we had garage doors at that time, and the garage doors were up. And we stood there a minute looking at it. What the hell is that? And we'd never seen anything, you know. And shut the doors, but then the lights were out. And it was all electric. We couldn't shut the garage doors. Now, so we're looking at this cloud, and I'm seeing all this stuff up on the top, which at the time, what is that? And of course it was shingles and debris, because by the time we saw the cloud, it was behind where the McDonald's is now at 176 and 31. You know the McDonald's there? That was Orchard Acres behind that. And that, what we saw, it was just being torn to hell. Now this cloud was real fat and real narrow at the bottom, but short, and it kept skipping. And it jumped right over the highway. And maybe even a couple of houses behind that, and then it went like hell towards the Sun Electric building. And it damaged that, and that's where it took our tower line down behind that. But this thing was bouncing. The whole, see, I'm seeing it the side view of it, not the oncoming view. And this thing was just bouncing along like a basketball. You know, it'd come down and jump maybe 20, 30 feet in the air, come down again. And that's what it was. After we saw what it was and figured out, hey, that's a tornado and all this, we jumped in a truck. Yeah. I want to check my house. So there was three of us in a Edison truck. And my house is okay. I want to check my dad and mother. They lived on South William Street. We go down South William Street, make the corner, go down Franklin towards the high school. And behind the high school, or behind that Esther Street there was that subdivision in there, and there was a lot of damage in there. We got in there, but it was just like going from one place to another, and the damage, and this side, nothing happened at all. It was unreal. By midnight, we couldn't find enough clothes to put on. It was colder than hell. We worked all night, you know. And we're looking for jackets, sweatshirts, anything we could find. We didn't have our own truck, so whatever gear anybody else had, we were wearing it, because it went from like 80, 85, 90 degrees. By the middle of the night, it was down in the 40s. Oh,
you mean they didn't send you home to get warmer clothes?
We didn't have time. You couldn't find a place to get a cup of coffee. Oh, we would work like all night and go home and come back 4 o'clock after room, maybe work the next night. This went on for a week. Once everything was isolated, then it was put the lines back up, even though the homes weren't there, because not every house was hit. There were still people living in the subdivision, so we had to restore, you know.
But which area do you think was hit the worst? The Colby subdivision? And
Bayview Beach.
Where's that?
Off of 31, behind Sun Electric.
Behind Sun Electric. There was some
because
terrible.
By the Lake Bayview Beach.
Yeah, I thought that was worse than Crystal Lake, and I was in both areas. We worked probably 2 weeks, maybe, restoring everything. And they saw the bottom of the lake in Island Lake.
Yeah.
We was out there putting wires up, and the guy says, you know, I seen the bottom of this lake. I said, what are you talking about? He says, when that thing went through here, he said, the water's parted. He says, I'm looking for Moses.
Palm Sunday, he was working. It was going to be Easter the next Sunday, so I was going to take the kids down to Meadowdale. It was so hot and oppressive while we were going through the stores, and I said, we're going to cut this short. We got to go home. And the kids were crying, Mom, you promised to get us some candy. And I said, I'll get you candy when we get up to Crystal Lake. I'll get it in Neisner's. So we drove up Virginia Cutoff Road and pulled into the shopping mall there. And my intention was to leave the car running and just run in, get the candy, and come back out. Now I noticed up in the Woodstock area that it was black as can be up there. And then I looked to my left and I said to John, look at those two funny clouds, because there were two white things coming down like this. And within a minute or so, it started to rain. And I'm not sure if there was sleet, but it was a driving rain. And if it hadn't been for the rain, I would have been in the store and the kids would have been alone in the car. As we're sitting there, all of a sudden, the force of this storm, the car starts to move. And John is in the front seat, Gretchen and Chris were in the back, and my baby was in flat on the back part of the car. And I found that I could steer the car. I thought, well, this is fine. You know, we're driving, I'm turning to the right and I'm turning to the left, and we end up in front of a women's clothing store, and the roof is gone and the mannequins are standing there all exposed to the weather. And by that, two people run up to the car and say, are you guys all right? And I looked around and I said, yes, and with that they were gone. And the back end of the station wagon, the rear window was blown in. And it was so bad that we couldn't see. There was mud and glass and things on the inside of the car. And I thought, oh, my baby has been pulled out by suction, and I didn't expect to even find her in the back of the car. So I got out, and there she was, sitting, laying where I had told her. However, this one behind me, I'd say, get down, everybody get down, and she'd pop up, what's going on? Get down, Gretchen, get down, Gretchen. My daughter Chris, who doesn't remember a whole lot, she says, Mother, that's the only thing I remember is his hand coming back and pushing Gretchen down. So I get out and I look and I see I got a couple of flat tires. My only concern is to get my children out of here as fast as possible. Right directly across used to be a gas station. There wasn't hardly anything of that. So I turned to the right to go through Colby subdivision because I wanted to get off the highway, and pulled onto Keith Avenue. And I didn't recognize the street because the first three houses were gone and all you could see was water pipes from the basement sticking up out of the ground. And by that, the man on the left side, who I understand family name is Kanak, he was hysterical, it was obvious. And he said, get out of here, get out of here. My dad's been decapitated back there. And I'm going, oh, that's all I need, you know, so. And I thought he was going to hurt my kids, so I step on the gas and I go to the end of the street, and they've already got wood barricades set up so that nobody could get in. I wanted to get out. So I zipped around those, and we came past Central School. We got to our house, and it's a sunny day. And our neighbors are coming out, and they say, do you happen to know what happened over there? I said, yes, I do. We were just in it. What was so amusing was when I was finally able to contact him by telephone, he called, or we talked, he said, you should have seen what I just saw. I saw a tornado go through Highland Lake. I said, are you kidding me? We were in it.
You should have seen that car. That car looked like it was sandblasted because...
You know, I was young, but I remember really specific things. It was one of those gray days, and it was just so humid. Mom said, you know, let's get in the car and go down to the shopping mall, Meadowdale, because back then a lot of the stores were air conditioned. And we lived in an older home and we didn't have air conditioning. So she thought, we'll get our Easter shopping done. There was a shoe store called Kinney Shoes. And we were all sitting in there getting you know, looking for Easter shoes. And sitting right behind us was a family, mom and dad and probably 2 or 3, 4 kids. And I remember just kind of looking around thinking, oh, they're our age. I wonder if they're getting shoes too. We ended up going back and we did talk about the candy thing. But I remember my mom getting back in the car very suddenly and said, get down on the floor of the car. And so I remember feeling just this force in the back of the car. And it would almost like being on some kind of carnival ride where the car was just going up and down and moving at the same time. The next thing I know, I'm looking up, and we've moved probably a good 30 feet in a matter of a couple seconds. And I remember looking up and seeing the roof of the store Neisner's we were in front of. All of a sudden it just came off. And it was just sucked off. And I remember seeing it twirl around twice and then go back down. It landed right on top of the building. And all of a sudden, I see people walking up from the store, out of the wreckage. And they're probably 25, 30 feet off the ground. And you could see people just trying to get out and scramble and get out of there as fast as possible. We didn't get hurt, but there was just fragments of stuff everywhere. And even my mom had bought us some dresses at the store, and they even penetrated right through the box, because when she took the box off later, she had to shake them out because it had, you know, it was like shrapnel. So then I remember us leaving and just looking around, and I remember the Standard gas station was just like a sardine can that somebody had opened and then just twisted the top. It was just twisted metal. And then I remember, as she said, we went down Keith Avenue. The first house I saw on the left, all that was there was a foundation. I remember looking there, and there was a station wagon in the driveway, and it was the people that had sat behind us at the shoe store, standing in the driveway of their home, and there was nothing left. You know, we were lucky. If it wasn't for my mom, I do believe we probably, steering the car, we would have gone right through the plate glass, because everything then was the big plate glass windows. We would have gone right through the window.
She drove the car on 2 flat tires.
Yeah. I walked 4 blocks to school. It could be clear as day out, and if it got really windy and I was walking to school, I'd turn around and run home. I was petrified, and to this day, even when I was raising my own kids, because I live in unincorporated Huntley, and I didn't have a siren out there. So literally my parents, if they heard bad weather was going to be coming in that direction, they would have to call me so I could get my kids in the basement.
We have an old house that has a cellar door, you know, like in The Wizard of Oz, that actually opens up like that. And I will agree, anytime a dark cloud came over, that child would run down in the basement and sit there, and I'd have to go get down and say it's okay to come out. So she was quite traumatized.
Within the year, we started doing tornado drills at school. And remember, they do it like the first Tuesday of the month at 10 or 10:30 in the morning. I think they still do them. And at school, we would all have to, you know, a bell would go off in the school, and we would all have to, you know, line up in the hall and get in our position. You know, we'd have to sit down and put our hands over our head and all of that. And, you know, that was very nerve-wracking, but, you know, we were all told it was a drill. Well, there were a couple times where we all had to do that in the hall. You know, in your first, second, third, fourth grade, you know, kids, and these are kids, again, that had been through this. They're whimpering, and we're all whimpering and crying, and we want our parents, and we just want to go home, and it was...
I remember looking towards the direction of Crystal Lake, and I could just see it being very dark. As we got into Crystal Lake, as Mom said, we came down Virginia Road. As we got right into the plaza, it's like it just went into like nighttime. I just remember it being very, very dark at that time.
That's right. I remember that.
Now, as we drove into the parking lot, At that time, it's kind of like I looked off into the horizon over the top, as Mom said also, of the buildings, and I did see two protruding clouds, just like two nubs hanging down, two funnel clouds.
So John and I both saw these two white things. Now, they were the funnel clouds, and they were white because they had not yet touched the ground and picked up all the debris.
As we got closer to the store, Mom parked, but I remember also at that time, I don't remember you getting out, but I just do remember it either you not be able to get to the store because it was raining or hailing or both at that time. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, it got very windy and all that. And as things kind of picked up and then like all hell broke loose, the car, as Gretchen said, was moving, and I don't, whether it was going up or down, but it was being basically dragged towards the building, and Mom was steering it. Now, I'm in the front seat, and, and as she said, everybody get down, and I kept kind of like looking up like that through the window over the top of the store still. I saw what Gretchen saw. I saw the top of the building go up, but I do remember it being laid down. And actually there was nothing there all of a sudden. So I was more concerned because actually I think I was kind of like looking towards because about that same time, we had the windows closed. Now what I know about air pressure and all that, I don't know if the window blew out or blew in, but the back window blew out of the station wagon. And I probably was paying more attention to what was going on in the back of the car than I was at that time what was going on in front of the car. But I do remember the car being sucked into the building and Mom drove it away, and then everything calmed down for a little bit. At that point, Mom making her way, actually there was a few other stores I remember looking at. There was a shopping, the Piggly Wiggly, which was completely destroyed. Other stores that made, but that had a big huge like dome or something on it. It was a big top-heavy store. That was not there.
Well, it was Palm Sunday, of course, and so we had been to church, and the kids, we all got home, and then we usually go to see Grandma, and then we have dinner at night. His grandma lived over in the Vista, the old part, on Briarwood, so his mother. So we usually take them, they went outside in their Sunday clothes and got their pants all dirty. So I said, well, you better change into your jeans. So they changed, otherwise we'd have been right in the middle of it. So they changed into their jeans, and we started hearing all these sirens, but we still didn't know what had happened. We thought maybe a bad accident. And then we came onto on Route 14, on the highway. And as we got closer, there were policemen stopping you from going into Colby subdivision. And we saw that some of the mall part had been damaged, the grocery store especially. And so we knew there had been damage done, and somebody said it's a tornado had hit. So then I said, we better go see how your mother is. So we went by the church, and Millie and Jack Allen, they belonged to our church and worked at the church. So we saw their two boys playing basketball. They didn't know anything about it. So I said to them, there's a tornado and it's hit the Colby subdivision. So they jumped in the car with us, and because they resided there, they let us through. And when we got there, their house was gone, and so was the one next door.
Jack was watching golf on TV, and his wife kept come up and says, Jack, get down here in the basement now. He says, there's bad weather in the area. Oh. He said, she went back down, and they come back up in a few minutes. She said, Jack, if I have to, I'm going to drag you down there. So he gets up, turns the TV off, walks over to the door to go to the basement, and just as he got to the basement door, the roof went off the house.
Yeah.
And she almost run over Billy getting down the stairs. She never had the time twice after that to get downstairs.
And the funny thing was, to me it was funny at the time because the roast was still cooking in the kitchen, in the stove. It was still connected and cooking. So Millie said, well, at least we'll have something for dinner, but I don't know where we'll sit. And I said, well, you all come to my house for dinner because my roast is cooking too. Reverend Dalrymple, our reverend at the time, was there. And so because we lost 3 members from our church, and he was visiting all the members. They all ended up at our house for dinner, and halfway through the lights went out, so we ate by candlelight, and there was all these people crammed in there. But it's something I'd never want to go through again, never. It was just, you can't realize the damage it does until you see it. And what amazed me a lot was people never lost their sense of humor, and the people were so caring and helpful. It's sad that something like that has to happen to bring that out, because the goodness of the people was amazing, amazing.
The neighbor's car was sitting right in the living room of Jack and Miller's.
Yeah, Jack and Millie's house. His neighbor was, his house was destroyed, and his car somehow was in the middle of his living room. And Jack said, do me a favor, I wish you'd get your car out of my living room. You know, I mean, there was humor, there was sadness, but a sense of community that was wonderful.
Tom and I were over there having lunch, and you had a babysitter for the kids. Linda Benson was her name, and Linda was probably 15, 16. I had told her to get the kids up, about 3 o'clock. They were taking their naps, and she did that, and then the tornado hit about 10 after 3. And 5 blocks away, we had no concept that anything at all had happened. There were only 2 houses that got hit, our house and the Adams house right next door. The tornado hit and blew the front door open, and consequently blew the back door out, and then the roof came off. And the kids were all on the first floor, and not really knowing anything, that happened. And she called her father, and her father came over and got us. I didn't go to the house. I was quite pregnant at the time, and so my husband Tom went and got the kids, and we went over. We went right to a friend's house, the Schwarzes, and we stayed there for about a week. And Mary must have thought it was a year, because we had 7 children under 4 in that house. But they were wonderful. I mean, they just, we stayed there, and we had actually been looking at another house on Lake Court, and there was nobody in that house, and we finalized it and moved in within a week. Our friends came and helped us salvage. We didn't have a whole lot of damage. There was glass and everything in the furniture, but I had a china cabinet. They said the front door blew open, and then blew the doors going out to a screen porch, and right next to the doors on the screen porch I had a china cabinet with crystal and china and things like that in it. No damage to that. It was so strange. The dog got out, and a couple days later one of the neighbors called and said he was sitting on the front porch, just on the front stoop. Kids don't really, they had no recollection of it. Amy was the only one that she had a little cut. When you think that your house is standing there and the roof is gone, and nobody got hurt. It was, just pretty amazing. And we never could decide what to pay a babysitter during tornado hours, so so I think we gave her a savings fund of some sort. Yeah.
Typical Palm Sunday, we came home from church, and my dad made some breakfast, and my brother and I were outside shooting basketball. My dad came out, and he loved to play basketball, so we were just shooting some hoops, and looking to the west towards the lake, the sky got really strange. I've never seen anything like it. It actually turned green. And my dad said, boy, this is going to be a storm, we better go to the garage. And it started to rain a little bit. And as it began to rain, the wind picked up, but it wasn't really crazy wind. It was just a mild wind. And I remember I was standing in the garage looking out, and the sky got real green and black. And you could see clouds at a very low level flying over us. It began to hail. And at that point, my dad knew something was up. And we were basically trapped in the garage because there was no door to go to the interior of the house. The only way to get to the house was to run outside and to get in. But it was really hailing a lot, and my dad just said, "Stay here." So we stood in the garage, watched the hail come down, and within a minute, it just stopped. And at that point, he knew that there was a tornado, and he said, "Kids, run to the basement." And by the time we got to the front door, it was coming through. And we could actually see, I could remember seeing shingles and debris flying to the south of us towards Lundahl Junior High School. And my neighbors across the street, my aunt lived across the street, I could see the bushes in the back, some of them being uprooted. And by the time we got in the house, it pretty much had full blown at that point. I mean, it was howling and blowing and all the things that happens in a storm like that. So at that point, the sirens went off, and my dad decided he said, "Hey boys, let's jump in the car and take a ride." We headed up to McHenry Avenue. We actually pulled into the parking lot, which was A&P, and at that point you could see debris going all the way east on 14, which at that point we just had to park and walk. My brother and I and my dad, we walked to the field, which I think is TJ Maxx now, and you could see the debris from Coventry going into Colby subdivision. And we walked into the field, and you could see our friend's house destroyed. It was gone, and that whole street was destroyed. And at that point, my dad teared up, and he said, "You boys wait here," because automobiles were turned over, houses were totally demolished, and I don't think he wanted us to see if there was any death or anything like that. I'll never forget my dad's eyes. He just started to cry of Colby and the plaza just being devastated. Walking down 14 and trying to understand that was, took me a couple years and I went, wow, that was really big. This was a big deal. It was my aunt, as I spoke, worked at the Checko Lodge, and back then Crystal Lake didn't have an ambulance or really a volunteer fire department. And we were very limited on resources, so they turned the Checko Lodge into for the injured, like a holding area or a staging area, till help could come. And I remember my aunt telling us about, they took the tablecloths and were helping bandaging people up and setting them down and feeding them, and waiting for some help to arrive. It's interesting that the tornado had missed that building. It literally hopped over the Checko Lodge and hit the plaza. So, it's the old story of hearing like the freight train come through and that type of thing. And once they knew that something had happened, obviously they looked outside, and immediately the owners at the time opened the doors up for rescue. So, she was very thankful. In fact, I think she probably went to Mass every day for weeks. But
we had a neighbor, good friend's neighbor, down about 3 houses down, and he was planting or taking down a big weeping willow tree. So about, I don't know, 5 or 6, 7 guys from the neighborhood helped him do that. And I was just had come home, and it was pooped out. We sat down there and talked a little bit before we got done, and One of the neighbors came over and said, well, they have storm warnings out. We could even possibly have a tornado. So we all took off for our homes, no hurry, because it didn't sound that serious. And I had just turned on the television set to see the golf match that was going on.
Well, it started to hail first, and the kids went out and picked up hail and came back in, and then we were going to a confirmation party next door. And so I was in the kids' bedroom getting them dressed. And I remember walking by the window and seeing that black cloud just hanging down. But you know, you didn't think that much of it back then. And all of a sudden I said, I have never heard the train that loud here. I did, and I opened the window. And it was gray, all gray. So I think we basically were almost in the tornado. We flew, shoes went flying everywhere, and we went running downstairs, and things were breaking as we were going down the stairs. So I think it had to hit our house directly. I don't think we would have made it, because we had to go all the way across the house and then down the stairs. And our poor dog upstairs was just having a fit, you know, scratching the floor.
It was scared to death. The dog was to go downstairs with us. He didn't know what was happening, and so while we were downstairs, we could hear the dog running from room to room trying to hide, you know. But after the tornado, the dog never liked to go in a car again with us.
So we stayed down there about maybe 4 or 5 minutes, I guess.
Not real long.
And when we came up, oh my goodness.
I went up first just to check things out, and we had probably one of the smallest houses in the subdivision at that time. And right at the top of the steps was our back door that went outside. And I saw a crack to the left of the door in our drywall. I said, oh my gosh, you know, now we have to do some repair. And then I looked out the back window, and I could see no houses. It was nothing but debris, no grass. Just everything was just a shambles. Debris was just thick, you know. And in fact, for years afterwards, my wife's the gardener in the family. Every time she would spade, or I would spade, and she'd, you know, rake it and get ready to plant things, we would find gloves, socks, and stuff from
we found
the
stuff
store.
From Neisner's that had just been
store over there.
Papers from their office.
They'd been driven down in the ground, obviously, and covered, and then we would find things for years afterwards. After I realized our house was still in one piece, more or less, a couple of the neighbors were out, and I joined them, and we started going up and down the street to see what we could find. And about the next block up, we heard somebody said they'd seen a body in the basement, so we brought the body up.
That was, he can't stand the sight of blood, so it brings things out differently to you.
Yeah, you do things that you don't think you would like to do. You just have to do it.
Right.
I remember carrying the body on a closet door that had been blown off, or a front door, I don't know, it was a door, and we used that as a stretcher and got him out of the house. But it was.
But we were lucky. We were one of the few houses that we were able to get our gas back on. You know, they come right away and turn off all your gas, and so we would fix meals. Yeah, we were fortunate.
We were the neighborhood welcome wagon, I guess. I don't know what you want to call it. We always had something cooking on the stove, and they could come and get it whenever they had to.
Things, though, you know, you may forget other things in your life, but that's something that really you'll never forget. I mean, you can still shut your eyes and visualize that day, and it's amazing after 50 years.
I was on the village board at the time. A couple of us men were running to be reseated. We're running for office. So we were out canvassing and trying to talk up so that we could get reelected. But it started to rain a little bit. So we took off and we went on the back of Island Lake on Burnett Road. There was a little pub there called Bruno's, and we went in there and we had a beer, and all of a sudden the power went out too. And I went to the window and looked over, and on the outside they had the old-fashioned metal canopies, and I looked under the canopy and I said, there goes somebody's garage roof. And everybody said, oh, you're full of bad word. And I said, I'm out of here, and everybody took off. but I was inside Gate 3, which was across from the village hall, and it was also a temporary housing for a fire truck from Wakanda Fire. And since I lived right across the highway from the village hall and on the Wakanda Fire Department, of course I looked at my house and it was okay, everybody was okay. I know there was roof damage that I found later. I think it was about $200 worth of damage, but I went over to get the fire truck out, and the corner of the building of the village hall was hit, and I had to throw cement blocks and stuff out of the way. So I opened the door so I get the truck out. At that time, I didn't know, and a couple of other guys that were on the west side of Island Lake, we didn't know that there was that mass destruction on the east side of the lake. When we got the truck out and went through Island Lake, which is Lakeview Drive, we saw one house that was gone and a couple of other places that were damaged really bad. We went up around Lillian Court and there was some damage to a couple of houses there. But the power lines on 176 in front of the village hall, because there's a power distribution center there, and up would be east past where the spillway is. The power lines, the high tension power lines were all down and some of the poles were down. So that was a problem that we had no power. We worked hard. Finally we got with the care, we got the highway back open, because the highway going east towards Wakanda was impassable. Ruined 40 homes in Island Lake, as far as I can recall. Really? And Virginia Greck was our civil defense director, but she called in other agencies to help clean up and that type of thing. And then also Mayor Slavagian, he sent in some front end loaders and trucks and things, and
from Waukegan,
because of all of the nails and scrap laying around, there were a lot of flat tires and things, so they brought in flat tire repairs, and it missed my house by 150 feet. Wow. Praise the Lord.
We were at my mother's house, which is down near Rawson Bridge, right on the river, as a baby shower for my sister-in-law. And we must have had 20 people and kids and everything there. No guys, just... And the electricity went out, which was pretty common then. And but we had our coffee made, and so we didn't care. We got coffee, we had a party here. And it was sunny. It wasn't, didn't look stormy at all, and her house is like 2 miles from Island Lake. Well, anyway, a little later, not much later, we got a call from one of the gal's husband, who was a gas station owner on 176 in Wakanda. And he told her that their house had been hit in Island Lake, and their 2 girls were home alone, a 12-year-old and a 2-year-old. Fortunately, the 12-year-old saw this storm and was scared enough to pull the baby out of her nap in the crib and head for the basement. Didn't make it to the basement. There's a basement wall and a couch on an angle, and they ended up behind the couch. And the house was demolished except for that wall and that couch. And the girls were fine. And there was still a little shelf with a teacup on there, and that was still sitting there. And the scary thing, more scary thing, was that a 2x4 had flown right through the baby's crib.
So, and of course everybody just scattered then.
By the time we got down to on Dole, coming up to 14, it had started to hail. I mean, that quickly. And so it was so much that we pulled into the second gas station on the right. No seat belts, so the boys were holding their hands out the window to catch the ice, you know. And then it stopped. So we started out again on 14. And in the meantime, it started to rain. Just coming down, just like torrents, you know, just really hard. Couldn't see. So by the time we got to where the Coventry subdivision was that they had started to build, all the traffic had to stop because the windshield wipers even didn't, you know, you just couldn't see. And then it just like stopped. It was, the whole day was so strange. And I looked to my right and the billboard sign was just falling down. The advertisement for the subdivision going up. And I said, oh my goodness, look at that sign. And it was, because it was huge. And then we could feel the car starting to tremble and rock. And then it started, it was like someone was rocking it back and forth from the outside. And my husband said, grab one of the boys by the arm. He says, because I think we're going to go over. And he said, I think we're in the path of a tornado. And you know, I didn't have time to be scared. I just turned around and grabbed, I don't know which one I grabbed. He grabbed the other one. And then we just started going over and over. And just before we started rolling, there was a station wagon in front of us. I believe it was a station wagon, 50 years, you know. The boat, they had a boat. And the boat went, we went, but that car stayed. It was so strange. And the car in back of us stayed. My 5-year-old said, oh, Mommy, look at the boat, it's flying. And right after that, that's when my husband said, grab one of the boys. And we started rolling, and I could feel my head being hit. It was like someone was hitting me with a pipe or something, a really hard object. And I could just feel it kept hitting and hitting. And we landed on the wheels. But the top of the car was caved in, and so we were like this, you know, we were hunkered down. And I turned around to look for the boys, and the youngest one was missing. He wasn't in the car. So, and all I could see, my son, I could just barely see the whites of his eyes. He was just, it was like someone poured a bucket of blood over him. The whole car, we were just a mess. We were just bloody messes. My husband, half of his nose was off, was just hanging, and blood kept running down from a punctured wound in my head. And he ripped off his shirt and kept wiping the blood. As soon as he would wipe my face, it would come back down again. He couldn't get out of his side because of the doors being smashed. And so he crawled out the window. There was no glass left in the car windows, except the little window by it was a 63 Chevy, so they had those little crank windows, and it was still intact, but all the other windows were out. And so I guess when the windows went out, got blown out, that's when it must have taken my son, the younger one. And so I started screaming. I I was yelling, "Where's Brian? Where's Brian?" And then I could hear my other son going, "Mommy, I want to go to the doctor. Mommy, please take me to the doctor. I want to go to the doctor." And I just kept screaming. I couldn't stop. And my husband had to slap me to get me to stop. But I guess I was in shock. And once he crawled out of the window, he found our son laying on the ground by the front wheel on the driver's side. And he was passed out. But he didn't have a scratch on him. So he picked him up, handed him through the window to me. I don't know how he got my door open, but he got it open and got us out. And someone, I believe it was the car that had the boat attached to it, they put us in their back seat and gave us blankets. The youngest boy, when we got into the other car, he started screaming. He thought the car had caused the tornado of, being little. And I had to try and tell him that everything was going to be okay, that we were going home, and that, the car was fine, and there was no more tornadoes. We went to the doctors, and I never saw that car again except for pictures. And then 10 years later, I started having grand mal seizures from the trauma. Hits to the head. And of course I'm on medication, so it controls the seizures. But at that time, I didn't know what was going on until after my baby was born. And she's going to be 50 in August. She says, "I'm the tornado baby." And the 5-year-old was very proud to show his stitches. He had stitches all over his head, his face, his lip, over his eye, the side of his head. He was showing them to all of his classmates. And if it hadn't been for my neighbor, I don't know what I would have done, because she just came over and took care of all of us. But I couldn't wash my hair for almost a month. My head was so sore. I had like huge knots on my head like this, all over my head.
Yeah, we had come back from a ride early in the morning, and it was a nice day, and we had pulled in, and my daughter, who was 2 months old, needed a nap. So we pulled in, and I had left the car in the driveway like everybody else, and my wife took Jennifer up to a nap. And at that time, it started looking like a thunderstorm coming, so it started raining and then hailing. And my son, being 2, was real curious about the hail, so we went out the front door that you saw in the house there and stood in the garage. And it started hailing, and I thought, I better get the car in. So I had Ken move with me and put the car in, and then we stood there watching the hail come down, and it got pretty large. And all of a sudden, Crystal Lake at that time was a holding pattern for O'Hare. So if they had storms, there were circling airliners going around. And I heard this, what sounded like a jet engine, but it was missing. And I thought, ooh, that doesn't sound good. So I went through the garage to that back door, looked out to the west, and all I could see was debris floating in the air. It was so close, there was no funnel shape to it. But there was a roof going by and shingles and stuff just floating slowly through the air. And I grabbed Ken, ran in, and I told my wife, who was upstairs with Jennifer, told her to get her down and come on down into the basement. And that's a tri-level, but my father-in-law had built a shop down even below that, so there was a really secure basement under that. And we just got down, and there was a large table there, a work table bench that he had, and we got under that in a storm, and it hit. And our ears popped. You couldn't hear one another. There was a lot of crashing and breaking glass, and and it seemed like it was going on forever, and obviously wasn't. And we stayed under the table, and it got totally silent. And we sat there, and we thought,
gosh, I don't know if we should get up because I don't know if something more is coming, but it was totally silent. And I waited a little bit and went upstairs into the lower level, and there was glass all over. Matter of fact, there was a shard of glass about like this that had blown all the way across the family room, and it was stuck in the wall. So if you'd have been out there, you'd have been cut to ribbons. And then I realized, you know, I knew by that time that we had been hit by a tornado. I didn't know how much damage or what. So I told the kids and my wife, Jane, she's since passed away, to stay down there, and I wanted to go out and see what was happening, how neighbors were doing. And I got out the front door, and there was this loud roar and a smell of natural gas. And I thought, oh, geez, there's, you know, it's somehow the pipes broke and so forth. And a group of guys from across the street and next door, we checked on each other. We were all okay, and we thought, we got to get this gas off, because if something sparks or whatever, you know, we're going to have an explosion and a fire. So we got some wrenches and went around the neighborhood where we could, because we couldn't do it all. You know, but what had happened is the walls had disappeared, the meters had fallen off the walls, and the gas was just roaring in the air. So we got some of that shut down, went around checking on neighbors to see if they were okay. Everybody there were some injuries, but nobody was killed in Orchard Acres. It was more in Crystal Lake by Colby subdivision. So we went through the neighborhood and decided to go back and have a beer at this guy's house. And we went back, it was right across the street from us, and went back, and he went into his garage, which was partially gone, and went in the refrigerator, and somebody had already looted and stolen this beer. He says, of all the times I needed a beer, somebody took it. So it was kind of the standing joke, you know. Well, then we realized, hey, we got other problems here other than that. That was the only bad thing that happened. But on Route 31, it was a 2-lane highway at that time. You couldn't drive into our subdivision because of debris, but people were stopping, and they were starting to come in the subdivision picking through our stuff. And which we had no police, we had nothing but ourselves. And just our presence stopped that. There are not a lot of people that do that. There are just a few, you know, that do that. But they had made it all the way into the subdivision by that time. You know, basically, we were one of the fortunate. Our house and the one next door, the one without the garage, this one fellow had bought a new Mustang, and he had it in his driveway like I had my car in the driveway. And he was going to run out and put it in his garage, and it just started hailing bad, and he thought, I can't do anything with that. When he came out after the storm, the garage was totally gone, down to slab, never found it. It was a pink house. They found the part of it in Island Lake, on the edge of the lake there. And the only reason he went over there is it was about the only pink house at the time around there. And his Mustang was dented, but it never moved. But the garage was totally gone. There was nothing. It was just a cement slab. The important thing, I think, the message that I want to get across is there were some very, very good people that within Crystal Lake, within the Mennonite community that came up. They came from what I think was northern Indiana daily. They didn't stay. They did their chores early, came up, and they were there by 8 o'clock. And they came up and said, well, what do you want us to do? They literally, in our property, raked the whole lawn, took all of the glass and metal and debris away, and they loaded those into trucks that were coming in. They righted there was an Orchard Acres. What trees they could save, they righted and staked, and told us how to get those to survive. The ones that they couldn't do, they took down for us. They did that up and down our neighborhood, and people just rallied around things. Salvation Army came in with their canteen, and they literally fed my family for 4 days because we couldn't get in and out of there. Well, we couldn't leave the house. We were working on trying to keep things from further damage. So they fed us. The police were wonderful. And then eventually the city of Crystal Lake realized that there was more to it than just the city. And they had their hands full. Crystal Lake did. It's nothing negative about that. But they opened their arms to us too. The churches, Jewel. If you had your, we called them displaced person tags, you had to wear this tag to get in and out of your neighborhood or walk around it because they'd arrest you for, you know, thinking looters and so forth. We had these, and Jewel opened up, we had no electric, so they gave us fresh meat and any bread or anything we wanted. It was just a really very positive response, not only from neighbors, but from Crystal Lake itself. And it, you know, Crystal Lake was really devastated, but boy, it rose to the occasion. It made you feel that you were part of a community. There's no doubt about that, a real part of community.